Okay, good morning everyone. We're on Parshat Pikudei 530 in the Art Scroll, 531, and this is the last Parsha of Sefer Shmois of the Book of Exodus. And what I want to do today, because today is, firstly, it's Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, which means it's 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks till Purim. And Adar is a month of redemption because we were redeemed in the time of Purim. And so we wanted, this year today should help that we should be fully redeemed. That firstly, immediately the hostages should be released. We should prevail. There shouldn't be any problems in Eretz Yisrael, but Mashiach should come. Because Adar and Nisan are the 2 months of redemption for the Jewish people historically. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, in the times of Purim, these are the times that Hashem sends redemption to the world, and to us particularly. So that's what we should be focusing on, is how are we going to get redeemed. So I'm going to start with a story that I was sent this morning, which just reminded me, it's 10 years the other day since MH370 went down. And there was a story, I glanced at it. I'm just going to open it up on my phone and just look at it quickly. But essentially the story goes that there was a man known only as Andy. Andy wanted to book a trip from Australia around various different places through Southeast Asia. And he asked his travel agent to please book him a flight on the MH370 he said, on whichever date it was, from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. And his travel agent sent him a reply back that said, travel agents remained anonymous according to this, I just don't like Jews flying on Shabbos, and so I'm not booking that flight for you. So Andy eventually agreed, and he booked him another flight. And this email was published. The messages go something like, when Andy heard about the crash afterwards, he wrote, I'm quoting, "Holy God, you sure heard what happened to MH370. I cannot stop thinking about this. It's a true miracle for the books. You are a true lifesaver." In January, so the story goes back in January. Andy emailed his travel agent asking him to book 4 flights for a round trip from Australia through several cities in Asia. One of the legs he requested was from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8. That was the MH370. He specifically asked for a Beijing-bound flight that would land early in the morning on Saturday, so he could get to a 3 p.m. conference in someplace Fangshan in China. The agent found in Malaysia Airways Flight 370 departing Kuala Lumpur 12:35 a.m., landing 6:30. But he booked it for Friday morning rather than Saturday morning. One amendment, I need the KL flight to be a day later. Andy told him, I need an extra day in Kuala Lumpur. Travel agent refused, saying, I wish I can give you a day later. Andy said he would book that leg himself, but a few hours later emailed the agent again with a change of heart. He said, you're right, I should be more observant. I'll manage without that day in Kuala Lumpur. He was already in Beijing when the plane went down. So Ori sent me, my son sent me that story this morning. He said, wow, and I remember the story at the time, but it was 10 years ago this week, and so... Yeah, it was Dan's travel that was on there.
On the TV at the moment about
because it's 10 years and they're starting to look in different ways, and a whole thing about why they can't find this lost plane. Okay, so that's not our Parsha, that's not what we were talking about, but because we saw it, Hashem... The Baal Shem Tov says that Hashem, everything we have in life, every person we meet, every instance of anything that happens to us is there for a reason. And so the reason I saw that, I didn't really have time to look at my phone, to be honest, because we had breakfast at Ashia straight after Shachris. It's Rosh Chodesh, that's a long davening, it's a public holiday, so we started late. Everything was like crunch time. But I just glanced at my phone and I saw this message, and so I Googled it and I got the details. So therefore, we needed to hear that, or I needed to hear that. Somebody needed to hear that. Whoever that somebody is, Hashem's put it in my head, in Ori's head, to tell me, to tell everyone. So that's why I'm passing it on. Okay, Parshat Pikudei. Pikudei is about counting. What are we counting? Page 530, 531. The counting of what was donated to the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu basically was held to account. Hang on, did you steal anything? No. Every single slither of anything that was donated was accounted for. And so the first verses list all that was done and every single thing that was used. Oh, you donated X number of this, and we used X number of that. That was what it was. Every single thing, line by line, it goes through each different thing that was donated. So firstly, it tells us that Bezalel, who learned out the last weeks, and this Parsha is pretty much a repeat of what we've learned for the last 4 weeks. This is the 5th week of repetition in different forms. So the rest, most of the rest, the middle part of the Parsha is really all what we learned in Tetzaveh, which is all about the priestly garments and the making of them. So we learned what they were, and now we learned that they were made. But the first part is just a beginning of everything that was there. Everything that was made for the Mishkan. This is what was donated. This is who built it. And this is what they used. And it's actually the important lesson here is for anybody who's involved with communal money. Got to be above and beyond the letter of the law. Every communal money is not your own money. Whatever that is, I mean, a little simple example. There's tissue boxes in a shul. To walk up to a tissue box and go like this and take 6 tissues, blow your nose and throw it in the bin, that's wasting the community's money. And everything else that goes with it. And so there's a very important message. Whenever we're involved with communal things, we're on the community's payroll, so to speak. Even though we're not getting paid, because it's other people's money. So it mentions the gold, the silver, the copper, everything they did. Okay. It also mentions in verse 25. If you look at verse, the Parshat Pikudei Purim Kikar ve'elef shva meos, the silver census that the community was 100 talents, 1,775 shekels in the sacred shekel. That silver of the shekel was Parshas Kisisa that we learned 2 weeks ago, which was also Shkalim that we read this last Shabbos, was at that time they brought a half shekel for each person as a one-off. That went to building the sockets for the beams, the silver sockets. The ongoing in history, as we went on, every year, which is the reason why we read Shkalim last week, just before Rosh Chodesh Adar, is because the people used to, the fiscal year, let's put it that way, of the Beis HaMikdash was from the 1st of Nisan. So from the 1st of Nisan, which is a month from today, is where the fiscal year starts. And the Mishnah discusses what happens with money from last year, money from this year. It all goes towards the sacrifices and to the Beis HaMikdash. And so there was the initial gathering, which was for the sockets. And then every year later on, once we're in Israel and we've got the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash, we need to keep that going. The ongoing maintenance and ongoing costs of all the offerings was used with that half shekel, which is why we read it just before Rosh Chodesh Adar, because we need to know that when the temple's rebuilt, please God, it should happen before Pesach, that we can bring the Korban Pesach, we need to be giving a half shekel. And the half shekel that we would give is every single person. The Torah says, doesn't matter if you're rich, doesn't matter if you're poor, everybody's got to bring a half shekel. A half of your common currency. And so we bring 50 cents. We actually bring 3 times 50 cents according to many customs because it's mentioned 3 times. So we bring 3 coins. So a lot of shuls will have 3 50-cent coins taped together and you pick it up, you acquire it, you put your money into the thing, and then you bring it on your own behalf and your families and whatever, however else everybody works. But that's generally, and it's usually done just before Purim. This year, because Purim's on a Sunday, we do it on, it's done on Tanis Esther, on the fast of Esther, but because Purim's on a Sunday, we can't do it on Shabbos, so it would be we would do it on the Thursday, on the fast day, which is 2 weeks' time.
What do you lift up?
Whenever you, in Jewish law, whenever you acquire something, one of the ways of acquisition is by lifting up something. And so you go and sell your chometz. Most rabbis, today it's a little bit different because of this online selling of chometz, but you can't do a kinyan. It's called a kinyan. And so if you pick up something that belongs to, just let's say you go to the rabbi and you empower him to sell your chametz. He's not buying your chametz from you. He becomes your agent. So he takes on the task. So by him taking on the task, you lift up his hat, his handkerchief, his tie, whatever, some object of his.
Giving him permission to do it.
That's just basically you giving him thing. It's at a bris, for example, many brisim, the moil will give the father. The mitzvah of a bris is on the father of the child, but obviously most fathers can't do the bris. So the moil needs to get permission from the father. So he will give him the knife. The father lifts it up, or some other object that he owns, and he says, making a kinyan, this is going to become yours. In a lot of shuls give a bar mitzvah boy a book on Shabbos. You can't give gifts on Shabbos. There's certain gifts like that we don't give. So what they would usually do is before Shabbos, when they buy the book on Friday, just before Shabbos, somebody in the office, let's just say you got a shul office, you've got the office, the CEO of the shul and the rabbi, the CEO or whoever it is will pick up that book, make a kinyan on behalf of the bar mitzvah boy, that he will take ownership of it today so that the bar mitzvah boy gets it tomorrow. It's, I don't want to use the word halachic loophole, but it's a way of doing things that creates no problem whatsoever in halacha.
Is he allowed to take the book home on Shabbos?
If there's a eruv, if there's no eruv, he can't carry it.
Because I've seen them giving.
Yeah, so it depends on the shul, but generally, if people know what they're doing, they will go through something like that, or they'll give it to the boy beforehand. He'll take a kinyan and then present it to him on Shabbos. It varies different ways, but generally we would do that. So any transaction in halacha, signing a document, like we would sign a deed of sale, for example, of something, is not valid in halacha. What's valid in halacha is there's witnesses witnessing the document, but we need to make some form of kinyan, of acceptance, to take possession of an item. That depends what it is. If you're buying a cow, you've got to pull the cow along, for example. So you buy a car, maybe you have to drive, you can't pick it up, maybe you have to drive it, whatever it is. But if you need to make some form of halachic transfer of ownership, and that's what the kinyan is. Okay. The next part of the parsha discusses, and I'm going to go through the parsha pretty quickly because I've got a whole lot of things I want to cover today. The next part of the parsha covers the priestly garments. So we're on page 532-33, chapter 39. It says there Aaron's vestments, and it lists out exactly what we had learned 3 weeks ago in Parshat Tetzaveh about what were the vestments. The ephod, the breastplate, the robe, the tunics, the headplate. Goes through all of that. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at verse 2, 39:2, but nearly halfway down the page, it said, just in English, he made the ephod of gold, turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, and twisted linen. They hammered out thin sheets of gold and cut threads to work the weaver's craft into the turquoise, into the purple, and into the scarlet wool, and into the linen. Okay, so we'd learned that before. This was the place where you can. Every time there's an aveira that we can't do, somewhere in life, in the Torah, it's acceptable. And so wool and linen in the priestly garments is acceptable. The other place it's acceptable if you have a linen garment with 4 corners, you can put woolen tzitzit on it. Other than that, we're not allowed to wear wool and linen, correct. So if you look at what this says, so they had linen, 3 types of wool, twisted threads with gold that was hammered out and cut, threaded into it. Okay, so now this is how the threading or the threads worked. You took 6 strands of each of those fabrics. Okay, so I took 6 strands, let's start with linen, 6 strands of linen, took this gold, hammered it out very, very thin, and cut very thin strips of gold. Imagine just a single thread of gold for a necklace, and wove those 7 things together. And that was the linen. They did the exact same for the 3 types of wool. So they had 28 threads all weaved together now for each thread that they wove. It was just an incredible garment, an incredible skill to be able to weave with that type of thread with gold in it as well. Now, in this version of the Chumash that I've got, which is a newer one than the one you've got, It has pictures in the back here, which I wanted to show you if I can find them. Yours doesn't have it. Sorry. I've got a whole lot of colored pictures. Here we go. Let me just do this. So, I don't know if you can see on this page, that was the regular Kohen's garments. So it was a white tunic, a white hat. Underneath the tunic he had short pants on and a belt, a colored belt. The Kohen Gadol, on the other hand, had 8 garments, which he wore. And I'm going to turn over the page and you'll see a little bit more detail on the ephod and the breastplate. But he had a hat, he had a tzitz, which was a golden forehead plate above his tefillin. And he had a robe, and he had another robe underneath it, as well as his different belt, and the ephod, which is like a reverse apron. And I think that's over the page. Yes. So you can see it here. It had the 2 stones on the shoulder straps, and then it had the breastplate, which had 12 stones on it. And on that were written, as we discussed a few weeks ago, the names of all the tribes. You can see it's folded. I don't know if you can see here.
Wonderful.
It was.
Can you imagine the weight?
It was all woven materials, but the stones would have been pretty weighty, yeah. And that was the first computer in history. That breastplate, the Kohen Gadol would go in, and the king or the leader of the Jewish people would ask questions as to should they go to war, for example. And we discussed this a few weeks ago, and the lights would light up. And it would tell the Kohen, yes, you should go to war, or no, you shouldn't, or any issues of state, major issues. We couldn't go there and say, should I eat breakfast today? That wasn't what it was for. It was, but it lit up. How it lit up, and it remembers on his chest. He's going to look down. There's flashing lights. He's got to interpret it. Perhaps, maybe it was on the screen in front of him. However it was, maybe Hashem, but it was these things lit up. That's called Arba Turim, the 4 rows. The Torah mentions 4 rows, and the stones that are mentioned, the Art Scroll doesn't even translate them. They just write the Hebrew words in English because we don't know exactly what these precious stones were. They were extremely precious stones. But Arba Turim, we have the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, is a commentary on a commentary of the Sefer called the Arba Turim, written by the Tur, who was an early Rishon, 800 years ago, who codified, he was the first person to codify Jewish law into sections. The 4 different books that we've got, these 4 Turim, these 4 rows, is how we learn halacha today. So the Tur was the first who did it in that way. People previous to him, the Rambam and others, did it slightly differently, but he did it in these 4 different books, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch is completely based on. It's a commentary on that. And so he picks up the word from Arba Turim. Okay, then we get to, we're on page 534, 535. Moshe Rabbeinu now comes and inspects the Mishkan. He has a look, what's going on, what have we built, and he goes through all the utensils and all the setup of it. And then Hashem says on page 536, 537, Adaber Hashem and Moshe Leimu, B'yom HaChodesh HaRishon Be'echad L'Chodesh Takim Es Mishkan Ohel Moed. Hashem says to Moshe, on the first day of the first month, erect the tabernacle. Tend to me, the first day. It's actually, if you look at the Hebrew, Art Scroll have thrown some extra words into the English. But if you look at the Hebrew, it says, B'yom HaChodesh HaRishon, on the day of the first month. It doesn't say Be'echad, the first, HaRishon Be'echad. Okay, so it says the Chodesh Takim. On the first day, in other words, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is a month from today, erect the Mishkan. The issue is that they had built the Mishkan. They started building the Mishkan the day after, they started collecting for the Mishkan the day after Yom Kippur. 3 months prior, 5 months, 6 months prior to the 1st of Nisan. It took them effectively almost 3 months to build it. Collect the money in a couple of days, everything was collected, and they built it. The Mishkan was ready to be built in Kislev, on the 25th of Kislev. And Hashem said, stop, don't put it up. And in a way we can say Kislev complained. 25th of Kislev says, hang on, that's not fair. It's ready, you're leaving me out. Hashem said, don't worry, I will give a Yom Tov one day on the 25th of Kislev, and that's why we have Chanukah, on that day. It's an acute way of that the rabbis put it in terms of that's why Chanukah is there. That day is a day for redemption, for winning battles and whatever, but Chanukah was that day. So we went from 25th of Kislev until the 1st of Nisan, 4 months later, before Moshe puts it up. That we're going to learn about in Parshat Shmini on the 8th day, because they practiced for 7 days before that. But Moshe puts it up on that day, and we go through everything he did, repeating every single thing. Place the Ark of Testimony in the screen in the Ark of Petition. Bring the table and prepare its setting. The menorah, kindle its lamps. Prepare the golden altar for incense in the Ark. Put the curtains up. Place the elevation offering altar in the front. Put up the courtyard, the tent of meeting. Bring the kior. All of these things. And now bring it all. And then it says, in the first month of the second year. So it's now a year later after they've gone out of Egypt. Almost exactly a year, 2 weeks short of a year. After they've gone out of Egypt, they put up the Mishkan on page 538, 539. And again, it tells us that Moshe erected the tabernacle, he put its socket in place, its socket, the cover the tent from above. He took and put the ark in the thing. It repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. He placed the menorah. He put up the curtains, put the kior there. And then it finally ends up at the bottom of 538. Bavoyam el oil ma'ed u'kraftam el mizbeach yirchatzu ka'asher tziva Hashem es Moshe. When they came to attend a meeting, they approached the altar, they would wash as Hashem had commanded Moshe. Everything Moshe did was as Hashem had commanded Moshe. Everything that came down. Then he erected the courtyard, the tabernacle, the altar. He put the curtain in front of it, and Moshe completed his work. V'yachal Moshe es hamalacha. Moshe completed all the work, and then Hashem's glory came down and rested in the Mishkan. Cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. Moshe could not enter because Hashem's cloud was there. The glory of Hashem was there. The spiritual impact of the Mishkan, of Hashem's presence in the Mishkan, prevented even Moshe, who'd been on Har Sinai with Hashem for 120 days, from going in, because Hashem's so much, if we could say it like this, of Hashem's presence was resting in this structure. Now, the whole Mishkan structure, let's just think about how big this building was. The Mishkan itself, in other words, where the menorah, the shulchan, and the golden altar were, and then the Kodesh Kadoshim. So the Kodesh and Kodesh Kadoshim was 30 amas by 10 amas. That's usually easiest way to understand amas to meters is divided by 2. So most opinions are around that number. All opinions are around that. A little bit more, a little bit less. So 15 meters by 5 meters. Small, a home swimming pool, I guess. That's a whole Mishkan. We're talking about millions of people are going to be serving in and around the Mishkan. Only the Kohanim were allowed in there. The Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark was 10 by 10, 5 meters by 5 meters. This room probably, give or take. And in there was the Aron. The Aron itself didn't fit in. The space of it, the way it's described, it couldn't fit physically because it was the point where Hashem's presence came down. It was that point where physicality and spirituality joined completely. It was beyond the physical. And so therefore, it didn't take up any space really, the Aron. The room, the Kodesh behind that, which is where the Kohanim lit the menorah, brought the lechem apanim, the showbread, and the incense on the altar, that was the first part of that room. That was the whole thing. The courtyard area around that was 100 amas by 50 amas. So 50 by 25 meters. 50 by 25 meters is your standard Caulfield block, plus a half of the next block. 1.5 houses in Caulfield. So pretty much. That's the whole Mishkan. and everybody's got to fit in there, and you've got to excise the Kodesh. When we go to the temple, it wasn't much bigger. It was bigger, but we had millions of Jews. One of the miracles of the temple, which we learn in Pirkei Avos, was that nobody ever had a problem bowing down in the courtyard. Now, can you picture the courtyard with millions of Jews, an area not very big, but people not bowed down like bowed down, lay down, prostrate, flat, completely on the ground. And nobody ever had a problem with another person encroaching on their space. Because, quite simply, that space is beyond physical. It's that point where Hashem kisses the earth. And therefore, spiritual things happen there. Why do we have a Western Wall today? I mean, the reason we have it is Hashem wanted to leave it there, because Hashem says in the Navi that He will always leave His presence. Even though the temple's destroyed, the first temple, the second temple, even though the temple's destroyed, Hashem will always leave His presence at that Western Wall. So when the Romans came along to destroy the temple, they sent 4 generals, one north, one south, one east, and one west. The north, south, and east ones destroyed the kotel. The kotel that we've got is the outer retaining wall of the Temple Mount. It's far away from the temple. You can get as close as we can get without going up onto Temple Mount. That they've excavated an area, they call it the Kotel HaKatan, the small Kotel, which is right in the back of the Arab market in the old city. I think it's by the flower gate that goes up, and there's a few steps, and you can go up onto the bottom or second step and look up. You're in line with the Holy of Holies. That's the back of where the temple stood. That golden dome, according to most opinions, is the rock that it's on, is the rock where the ark stood and will, please God, stand very soon. And the temple will replace that building. It was the most magnificent building of all buildings ever in the world, because Hashem's presence rested there. But Hashem said, the Western Wall is going to stay. His presence will stay in the Western Wall. So the Roman general responsible for destroying the Western Wall tried and they couldn't. And then he had this brainwave. How he's going to get killed, because the king has told him, destroy it. You know, Titus Harasha said, you're going to destroy it. And he's coming back and said, I can't. So he has this brilliant idea. Let's leave something there as a remnant to show what we did destroy. That we left something to show the world that we didn't destroy it all, because this is how good we were. We were so good at it. We left something to show the world there's something left of this people that we wiped out. Well, guess what? The people that they wiped out, we're still sitting here, we're still learning that same Torah, and they are no longer with us, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Persians, everybody, all of these ancient empires, the Greeks, that all try to attack us, none of them are here. Yes, there are people called Greeks today, but they are not the ancient Greeks. And there are Persians. They're not the Persians from the Purim story. Let's end with the Parsha quickly, and then I want to speak a little bit about Purim. And what I want to discuss is the historical perspective of Purim. Where does it fit in? How did the whole story work? So the book of Exodus ends by saying that the cloud came in, as we said, and then it discusses when the Jews would travel. So it says, if the cloud didn't rise up, they would not travel until the day it rose up. The cloud lifted up off the Mishkan, and that was a sign for the Jewish people, right, we now need to get together, pack up, we're moving. And over the next 40 years, now at this point in time, the Jews did not believe they were going to be in the desert for 40 years. It was an 11-day journey from Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael. At this point in time, and we'll learn this over the next several weeks, but at this point in time, they are 11 days from getting into Israel. Unfortunately, they sent the spies, which cost them 39 years. But the cloud would be on the tabernacle by day, a fire at night before the eyes of all of Israel throughout their journeys. End of book of Shmos. And we say chazak, that is chazak, that we should be strong and be strengthened. Now, let's do a quick summary of this whole book. Where do we start?
Ask you a quick question on something you said there. The Dome of the Rock, the Jewish people aren't allowed to go in there. How come? But the Arabs, they can go in there. What is
okay,
this?
so there's halachic reasons and there's political reasons.
I see.
So which do you want? We'll do both.
If it's a whole long
No, it's not. We'll do a very brief thing. Okay, so the reason I said, according to most opinions, that rock is the rock, because there's about 13 different understandings of where the temple itself actually sat on the Temple Mount. Now, any person who's come in contact with a dead body is what's called tamei meis. They've got the impurity of being in contact with a dead body, and we are all assumed, even if we've never been to a funeral, we're all assumed to be tamei meis living out of Israel, and today in Israel as well, because we walk over graves. Australia is less of a problem because it's a newly settled country. The people who were here before, there were not that many people that they buried all over the show. You go to Europe, there's graves everywhere. I'll tell you a story that I heard. A father took his children and grandchildren to whichever one of the camps he was interred in. And the tour guide went along and stood on this mound and started giving the story. And the father started screaming at him, "Stop, stop, stop. You're standing on my parents." He says, "I'm telling you now, we've checked the site, we've done work on it, we know where the mass graves are. They're there, there, and they're there." He said, "No, you're standing on the point where my parents were shot." And the tour guide moved away, and they did some work afterwards, and they found there was a mass grave underneath them. And so we don't know where graves are. The way ritual impurity works is if you're on top of a grave, there's nothing between the body and the person standing on top except earth, therefore ritual impurity goes straight up. And so we're all ritually impure. In order to become pure, we need the red heifer. We need to have the ash of the red heifer sprinkled on. So we don't have that. And so we're all considered impure. Therefore, we can't go onto the Temple Mount where the temple stood. Now, there's 13 opinions exactly the way the temple was. It's like we know where roundabouts. We know definitely where it wasn't. So like where the Kotel is, where we go now, that's the southern part of the Temple Mount. Most of that is the extension that Herod made not long before the destruction of the second temple 2,000 years ago. That hasn't got the same holiness as the part of the first temple. And so there's various opinions about does the holiness still apply? It doesn't. That's beyond the scope of here. But so the rabbis consistently over history have said there is some form of holiness, most rabbis, there. We can't become pure enough to go to those areas because we might be in an area where we can't go in, where we are ritually impure. So people who do go up kind of stay around the perimeter, and they, according to their opinions, are okay. Politically, we say the rabbis, the chief rabbi's office, for example, have said, no, we're not going up. But that's in some ways more political than halacha, because there are definitely parts where we can go. Ritual impurity doesn't apply to non-Jews. And so therefore, they can't go into the temple itself because it's subject to a death penalty going in there if you are ritually impure. We see that with Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu. They did something wrong. They took foreign fire in when they shouldn't have. If you do the wrong thing there, it is subject to a death penalty. In the second temple, which was discussed before, to the last part of the second temple, the Kohen Gadol would go into the Holy of Holies once a year or one day on Yom Kippur. More often than not, he would die in there because he was not pure enough to be able to go in there, whether it was death or just because of the sins he did, because many of those people who became Kohen Gadol bought that position. They didn't deserve it. So yeah, we've got a problem. So no, that's okay. Good question. Okay, so we started off, we were slaves in Egypt. We went through Moshe's board. The Jewish people are getting more and more into slavery. Moshe's brought up in the palace and he suddenly runs away. He's thrown out. He's now called on by Hashem. He's in Yisro's house and Hashem calls him at the burning bush. And Moshe goes back, go through the 10 plagues. Hashem brings the plagues on Egypt, pulls us out of Egypt, takes us through the desert, through to the sea. We go through the sea on the 7th day after leaving. Sea splits. Sea kills the Egyptians. We come out the other side. We get all their wealth, their riches. We get to Mount Sinai. All our problems and hassles that we go through start there and then already. 3 days later, we complain about the water. Complain. Most of the complaints that were there, I heard a shiur last week about tracing who was complaining. And just about every single time, if not every single time, the main people the leaders of the leading complainers, let's call them that, were the Erev Rav. This group of mixed multitude of nations that Moshe took out. Hashem said, you want to take them out? They're your people. And right up until the golden calf, it was the Erev Rav that led it. Did some Jews get sucked into it? More likely than not, they did. but it was always this external influence of bringing others in that were not worthy of being brought in. Which is one of the reasons why today when a person converts, they need to go through a whole process and be sincere. If a person is going to convert and not be sincere and the next day not keep Shabbos, not keep anything, that conversion is probably not worth a piece of paper written on. Those children that person has may not be Jewish, depends on circumstances. But we need to make sure that we go through a process that's going to allow people to come into religion that are going to hold by it. We bought into it, so in a way we don't have a choice, but in a way we can't destroy that choice. We got no choice. We sucked into it. But it is necessary that the person has to be sincere. Clearly these people were looking at, or many of them, looking at, well, Egypt's being destroyed. These people are going out with all this wealth. Let me jump on the bandwagon. When Moshiach comes, that time Moshiach, we will never be allowed to have conversions again, because that's too late. You want to convert to Jews, convert to become Jewish when it's tough, not when it's easy. And so, yeah, will they have rewards and whatever the time of Mashiach? There'll be peace in the world, absolutely. But we will be the teachers. That's really going to be our role going forward. We got the Torah from Mount Sinai. Moshe goes up Mount Sinai, and we had the whole story of the golden calf. We then get to build the Mishkan. Hashem's presence was with us fully. We saw Hashem's presence. It says in the sea, even the lowliest maidservant saw a greater vision or experienced a greater vision of Hashem than Yecheskel the prophet centuries later. One of the greatest of our prophets who saw Hashem's chariot. He writes about Hashem's holy chariot, which we can't even understand. It's one of those parts of the Tanakh which it's read as a Haftorah, but it's not something we understand at all what it means. The lowest educated person at the sea saw greater vision of Hashem than even Yecheskel, who wrote about that and saw that vision. And then we dropped, and then we went up, and then we dropped, and we went up. And that's been Jewish life throughout all the centuries. Ups and downs and ups and downs. Our biggest asset has been our ability to bounce back. And every time we've bounced back has been when we've been unified. And every time we've been attacked and pulled down is when there's been disunity. It's like a broken record. It just keeps going and going and going. And the last 6 months, 5 months, we've had incredible unity. But the 6 months or 12 months before that, we had incredible disunity.
Yeah, unity.
And so, no, we're holding on still. We're holding on. We hope so. So, what happened let's segue into Purim now. Okay? What I want to do, I don't want to go through the Purim story. I want to go through, I saw an article on putting things into perspective by Robert Sussman, which just gives a perspective of the timeline of the Purim miracle. In terms of when it happened and how we went through from our exile by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, to the story of Ahasuerus, and then the story of going back and rebuilding the second temple. That time period is really the Purim time period of the Purim story. So we're now let's take it from where we're at in our Parsha. We're 1 year after the Exodus. Okay, just 15 days short of a year. The Mishkan is put up. We're 11 days from Mount Sinai. 11 days we're at Mount Sinai, 11 days from Israel. We start journeying towards Israel. We have the problem with the spies sent in. The spies go in and come back with their report, and we're told, guess what? You've got another 39 years in the desert. Spend 40 years in the desert. We then go into Israel. And under Yehoshua, they conquer Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. And that took 14 years. Divide up the land. Most of the land is conquered. And for the next 400 odd years, we have the Mishkan. We have the leaders of the Jewish people who are not kings. They are prophets generally, And they're people who lead the Jewish people while the Mishkan is mostly in Shiloh. And then we get the Jewish people clamor to Shmuel, and they say to Shmuel, we need a king. And Shaul HaMelech is appointed king. He's appointed for 2 years. Then King David's appointed. David is this outcast in his family. We've discussed King David before. He is now appointed king. Shaul dies in battle, whether it was with his own sword or whether he told somebody to kill him. It's an interesting part in Tanakh, the end of Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph. And then David takes over as king, and David basically takes over the city of Jerusalem, which he sees through prophecy is going to be the site of the temple. So he conquers Jerusalem. There was one part of Israel that wasn't conquered, conquers Jerusalem, and he's ready to build a temple. He starts bringing the ark in, and there's a whole lot of stories. We read those as Haftorah some weeks of the year. David is ready to build a temple, and he's told by Nathan the prophet, no, hang on, there's blood on your hands. You're a warrior. A warrior doesn't build a temple. Your son Shlomo coming in the word shalom means complete. Shalom is peace, but shalom is hello and goodbye and everything else, because it's about completion. It's about a whole everything. Shlomo Melech was complete. He was the king who built the temple. He was the king who had the greatest empire, kingdom in the world. He unified everybody. He was one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest person in the world. Certainly at that time, but maybe of all time. And he built the first temple. After he dies, the kingdom splits. And you have the northern kingdom called the kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Yehuda. And I was going to say Shalom Israel in tongue-in-cheek, unfortunately. And lots of the books of Nach, books of Malachim, of kings, discuss this king was good, this king was bad, he did good in the eyes of Hashem, he did bad in the eyes of Hashem, talking about northern and southern. But most of the time, they were kind of waxing and waning between serving Hashem and serving idols, and fighting with each other and fighting with others. The Assyrian Empire comes along and exiles the northern kingdom, 10 lost tribes as we call them. Now, they're not all lost, because there was trade between them. The people moving. There were still some people. They still had prophets in the northern kingdom. They still had people who kept Torah and mitzvahs, and people who used to come to the Beis HaMikdash. And so there were always people from the other tribes in the southern kingdom. And so when they were exiled, we call them the 10 lost tribes. There were many people from the other tribes within. Essentially, the southern kingdom was Yehuda and Binyamin. Shimon was kind of scattered all around, so there were some of those. Binyamin was a very small tribe. There were Kohanim and Leviim from the tribe of Levi, and others from all the other tribes. So even though we've got the name Yehuda as Jews, we are Jews, comes from Yehuda, Yehudim, there are other tribes still within us. So they're all 12 tribes are definitely represented. Who they are amongst us, we've got no idea. But we're all there. The Kutim was a group of people that were brought in by the Assyrians to settle. What the Assyrian Empire did was they resettled people, so you didn't feel comfortable. So they took this group from this country and put them there, and that group there. So the 10 lost tribes, 10 tribes were scattered across the empire, but the Kutim were brought into the northern kingdom of Israel, and they were attacked by lions. And they realized, the God of these people must be attacking us, and therefore they converted to Judaism. They became Jews. They've been called Samaritans through most of history. We won't go through what the Christian Bible says about them, but they were insincere converts, and they're not accepted in Judaism. Generally, they're not accepted. So they kept some parts. They essentially tried to keep the written Torah, not the oral Torah, and we don't accept them as being part of the Jewish people. But they were throughout history there. I mean, certainly 2,000 years ago, they were there. Comes along in the year 3318, Nebuchadnezzar, he becomes the king of Babel. He conquers Assyria, the capital of Nineveh, and he establishes Malchus Babel, the kingdom of Babel, Babylon. And so that's in the year 3318. In the Second year of his reign, he conquers Yerushalayim. He plunders the city and the Beis Hamikdash, but he doesn't destroy it. He exiles everybody, including the king Jehoiakim, the king of Yehuda, to Babel. And then, as well as, and we've heard of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel in the lion's den, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, 3 prophets who were thrown into a fiery furnace, all exiled into Babylon. He then sends Jehoiakim back to rule over Yehuda. So he sends him back as the king of the Jews that are left there, but he doesn't last very long. And then he rebels. After a few years, Jehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and 7 years after so there's 6 years, 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar crushes the rebellion, kills Jehoiakim, and puts his son in his place, still as a leader of the Jewish people in Israel. He rules for 3 months, Jehoiachin, and then again he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. And he exiles him to Babel, and this begins what we call the beginning of Galus Babel, the Babylonian Galus. But again, he puts Tzidkiyahu in his place. So there's several times where we could interpret, is that the beginning of the Babylonian exile, is it not? And this caused various things, which we'll get to shortly in the Purim story, as to when we knew there's a prophecy that we're going to be exiled for 70 years. The prophecy in Jeremiah in chapter 20, verse 10, says that, so says Hashem, when it be fulfilled in Babel, 70 years I'll remember you. And based on that calculation, when does a 70 years start? So at the moment we had the year 0 when Nebuchadnezzar establishes his kingdom. That could be a starting point, because that's the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. The second point now is when the Babylonian exile starts after that revolt by Jehoiakim, which is the second calculation. Or the third one is when the temple was actually destroyed in the year 3338. Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple, which had stood for 410 years. He took all the vessels from there, took everything to Babel, whatever was in the temple. What wasn't taken was various things like the Aron were hidden in tunnels under the temple. When the second temple was built, at the end of the whole Purim story, they never had an Aron HaKodesh in the second temple. The Kohen Gadol would go into the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, and there was just the rock there. So he would put down the offerings on Yom Kippur, just down, not where the Aron stood, like between the poles, he would put it down, but there was no Aron there in the whole second temple. One of the miracles of the third temple will be that the Aron will be revealed. A very small number of Jews remained in Eretz Israel, and many of those that were there were either killed during the destruction of the temple, or there was a famine and they died of starvation. But there were very few Jews left. Now, Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. He died, and he is succeeded by his son Evel Merodach. So he takes over the Babylonian Empire, and then I'm going to jump through the next few hoops, but there were several other kings. The Babylonian Empire came from Koresh. It then eventually we get to Koresh died for before that, sorry. Just want to find one. Oh, here we go. In the third year of Dariavash's reign, Dariavash Hamadai, so the Median Empire, he rules for a year. In the third year, they're convinced now that the 70 years are up. So they started the calculation. Belshazzar is now the king, and he starts the calculation from the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. And he says, the prophecy is 70 years. The 70 years are up. We are 70 years from the beginning of the Babylonian Empire, and we are now going to have a massive party. And Belshazzar has this massive banquet, and he uses the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. You're not allowed to use them. Guess what? He's now a head shorter. He dies. He's shorter, lost. How he died, I don't know, but he's a head shorter. On that night, the Medians now take over under Darius. We call him Darius in English, Darius the First. And the Persians under Koresh engage the Babylonians in battle. Belshazzar is killed, and Darius the First becomes the king. So that's the first period of 70 years. Then we get to Koresh reigns for 3 years, and he dies, and Ahasuerus takes over. The same Ahasuerus as our Purim story. Comes the year... Sorry? We got to him, yes. No, we've still got a few years left. Okay, here's a quiz question. How long was the Megillah, the Purim Megillah, how many years did it take? A long time. Not so long, but it is years. The whole Purim story, it seems like it's like all over. It's like in a few weeks. It was actually about 12 years. The Purim story, yes. That's a Ganze Megillah, yes. All right, so at the start of the 3rd year of his reign, he's convinced that the 7 years are up, and that's where the Purim story starts, really. He has this big party for 180 days for his whole kingdom of 127 provinces. And that's the beginning of the Purim story, 180-day party, and then he has a 7-day party for just the people of Shushan. And that's the downfall of the Jewish people, because they attend the party when they shouldn't. Even though they had light kosher meat and fully kosher wine, and everything was under the Eidah Charedis of the time. Everything was like top quality kosher cooking.
Under the Beth Din completely.
The greatest Beth Din of all. And they shouldn't have gone to the party. So yes, even though they were eating kosher food, they were doing things that were completely inappropriate. And we see this because on the 7th day of the party, and there's a whole dispute as to which women are the most beautiful women in the world. And Ahasuerus says, no, his wife Vashti is the most beautiful woman. She's the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Sorry, I'll have to come back to you on exactly who she was, but she was granddaughter of royalty. She's the most beautiful woman in the world, and his officers and his ministers that are sitting there with him prove it. So he says, fine, bring her in. But how do you prove she's the most beautiful woman? Stark naked. She's got to be naked. She now is obviously a little bit embarrassed. It's a discussion of what she was embarrassed about. But we tell kids she had pimples, or she had a tail, she had tzara, she had leprosy. Not leprosy as her bones are falling off, like a spiritual type leprosy that we talk about in the Torah. She had white marks all over her. She might have had a trunk, like a nose, like a long nose. Whatever it was, she was somewhat deformed and not very nice to look at. So she refused. So she became a head shorter. Because what do you do when you are drunk and your wife refuses to do something and you're the king? You lop it off. Easy. So the problem was he counted a lot of heads falling in the story. He counted the 70 years from the time that Nebuchadnezzar had pushed the first rebellion against Yoachim. So that's what he thought was the 70 years, because that's when Nebuchadnezzar was successful. The whole Purim story happens. Queen Esther is brought in as one of his wives. She becomes the primary wife. Now, just very briefly, and we'll probably discuss next week, we'll discuss Purim in a bit more detail in Megillah, but how old was Esther according to Chazal, according to our sources?
She was old.
Depends what you call old. Give me a number, anybody.
20, 30.
20, 50, flip 57?
With that
75.
horrible little man.
Wow.
According to Chazal, she was 75. She was also green. Her complexion was green. Now that could be looked as like olive skinned,
Yeah.
or it could be looked at she had this like strange coloring. She was like, I don't know, sallow looking maybe. But she had chayin. Chayin is the ability to attract people's attention and to wow. And so there you go.
What did you say? I said, you'll still become
Everybody is a queen in their own right or their own mind. It depends on the person. There's a whole lot of funny underplays in that whole story. But Esther was, according to most opinions, in her mid-70s, 75 years old, not necessarily the most beautiful woman in the world, but she was, because she had this ability to, like, people would gravitate towards her. She was the life of the party. She was. But completely, but snua, completely within the realms of quietness, and she wasn't out there and loud, and you see this in some of the things she says in the Megillah. She was an orphan. Her father had died when her mother was pregnant. Her mother died in childbirth. Mordechai adopts her. Mordechai also married her. And the whole story with her and being taken to the king, she didn't have a choice. The problem is, if she goes into the king out of choice, halachically, she's never allowed to be with her husband again. There's a whole story with Esther and Mordechai in the Megillah, which is going on about how if I'm with him out of choice, I'm reading into the words of Megillah, but this is really what it's saying, then I can never be with you, not only in this world, but in the next world as well.
Related, weren't they? Mordechai?
Yes, it was his niece. Yeah, his niece or cousin. It's probably first cousins, which halachically you can marry. We don't. We frown on it today, but halachically you can marry a first cousin.
Mordechai also didn't go to the feast.
Mordechai was the mashgiach who told the people not to go to the feast. Yeah, absolutely. He was the one, and that's why he was able to save us. Mordechai and Esther, so they were a married couple. She gets taken into the palace. For 12 months they get prepared. She refuses to get any of the adornments that they're putting on these women for 12 months, the perfumes and spices and whatever they did with them. She gets taken into Achashverosh, and he's enamored with her. And then the whole story of the Purim miracle unravels, where Haman gets ownership of the Jewish, to kill the Jewish people. He wants to pay a sum of 10,000 silver talents to buy the right to wipe out the Jews. Achashverosh, who's a bigger anti-Semite than Haman, go for it. Kol hakavod, they're all yours. And the story then unfolds from that. So this 12-year story is really the beginning part. Well, it begins 3 years into his reign. The first party, Esther's taken in a couple of years later. We don't hear about the next few years, and suddenly we're at the last 11 months. And that's the rest of the Megillah is that he last 11 months. Just to finish it off for today, Esther falls pregnant with a... Oh, she was probably 79 or 82 by now. I'm going to tell you a story to end off. That happened yesterday. We'll finish with the story that happened yesterday. No, very few today. So Achashverosh dies after 14 years of reign. His son Darius II, becomes king. And this is in now the 70th year after the destruction of the temple. And he gives permission for the building of the second temple. The prophecy that we had from Jeremiah is now fulfilled. The 70 years was calculated wrong by Belshazzar, was calculated wrong by Achashverosh, but it was exactly 70 years where they go back and build the temple. The sad part of the second temple was most of the Jews stayed in Babel. Not that many went back. And the second temple never achieved the glory of the first temple. We look forward to the third temple, which will be completely from Hashem. There are opinions that will come down from Shemayim, whatever that means. We're not going to build it ourselves. We need to put in our efforts, and the efforts we put in are in complete unity. So let's end with a miraculous story. It was announced yesterday that the Rosh Hashiva of Heichal HaTorah Yeshiva in Yerushalayim had his first son. Rosh Hashiva of Heichal HaTorah of Tzvi Kishelevsky, first wife died 6 years ago. 5 years ago, he married his second wife. They weren't zecher to children with the first wife. His second wife has just had a child after 5 or 6 years of marriage. He is 86 years old, or 88 years old, somewhere around 86, 87, and his wife is 56. First child. I know she's had children before, I'm not sure, but Avram Avinu had his first child when he was 86, 87, when he had Ishmael. So miracles do happen.
I think it's obvious.
Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. It's his child, it's a miracle. It was announced, they waited to make sure that the mother and the child were happy, and they announced it, and you see, there's a video on Yeshiva World News, I saw it last night, of Rav Sik Shalevsky coming back into the yeshiva and some of his bochrim standing around him, singing with him. Most incredible, uplifting story.
Hope you say for the Bobbits.
He will be 101.
Yeah, that's what
And we all look forward to 120 when we can all celebrate. Please God, for many years before we're all 120 in the Beis HaMikdash. May it be built soon.